So the addition of the pilot checklist was wonderful. Was a wonderful solution for the complex airplane. And Gawande reports that the pilots flew this complicated four-engine airplane a total of 1.8 million miles without an accident, all because of the pilot's checklist. Now, then Gawande turns to looking at, and this is again on page 37, looks to using checklists in medicine. So in 2001, a critical care specialist at Johns Hopkins Hospital named Peter Pronovost decided to give a doctor checklist a try. Now, I was shocked that this was 2001 because the airplane checklist was done in the late 1930s, that it would take this long to do it. But anyway, Peter Pronovost was a Johns Hopkins researcher, and he wanted to look at one thing. He didn't attempt to make the checklist encompass everything ICU teams. IC is intensive care unit. Might need to do in a day. He decided to tackle just one of the hundreds of potential tasks, the one that nearly killed Anthony DeFilippo, a story earlier, and that was a central line infection. Now, a central line it goes into the heart, and obviously you don't want an infection on a line going into your heart. So Pronovost came up with 5 things for the checklist. Number 1 was to wash hands with soap. 2 was clean the patient's skin with chlorhexidine antiseptic. The 3rd was to put sterile drapes over the entire patient. 4 was to wear a mask, a hat, sterile gown, and gloves. And 5 is put sterile dressing over the insertion site once the line is in. These seem, and he says, check, 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 5 checks. And the steps are no-brainers, he says. And it seems really obvious that that a doctor would wash his hands, clean the patient's skin with, antiseptic soap, put sterile drapes. Now, this probably surprised me. The sterile drapes were over the entire patient, so the patient's legs as well. The doctor wears a mask, a hat, sterile gown, and gloves, so the doctor has got all the PPE on. And then a sterile dressing goes over the insertion site. These all seem really simple. So what was interesting, before Pronovost decided to do this checklist, he had nurses observe doctors putting in central lines for a month. And he found, and this line is here, the nurses reported that in more than a third of patients, doctors skipped at least 1 step. So even though the 5 steps are very, obvious, simple, 1 is often forgotten in a third of the cases. So this is without a checklist. So you can see I have not only underlined this, I boxed it and starred it. So it might be something that you want to look, have marked in your own book too. Again, page 38. The next month, he and his team persuaded Johns Hopkins Hospital Administration to authorize nurses to stop doctors if they saw them skipping a step on the checklist. Nurses were also to ask the doctors each day whether any lines ought to be removed so as not to leave them in longer than necessary. This was revolutionary. Now I'm going to stop there because Pronovost had to persuade the administration to give nurses extra authority. And this is where not only teamwork is an element, but hierarchy, power structures. The doctor has more power than the nurse. And so in this case, the nurse was checking up on the doctor, and the nurse has to make sure that the 5 elements of the checklist were being done. And they also asked the nurses to ask doctors if the central line could be removed. And, I'm about right here. Gawande says nurses have always had their ways of nudging a doctor into doing the right thing, ranging from the gentle reminder, did you forget to put your mask on, doctor, to more forceful methods. I've had a nurse body check me when she thought I hadn't put enough drapes on a patient. But many nurses aren't sure whether this is their place or whether a given measure is worth a confrontation. Does it really matter whether a patient's legs are draped for a line going into the chest? Okay, that's the question. And the answer is yes. That's why the checklist says they have to cover the entire patient, legs too. The new rule made it clear if a doctor didn't follow every step, the nurses would have backup from the administration to intervene. Now, the results were astounding. The 10-day line infection rate went from 11%. That's, 11% is more than a little bit more than 1 out of 10. That's a lot of central line infections. It went from that to zero, just by following the 5 steps. So that's a revolutionary element that we see from resulting from the checklist. This was published. They called it the Keystone Initiative, and they, in this New England Journal of Medicine article, they figured that the Keystone Initiative's first 18 months, and I think this was in Michigan, where it was done, hospitals saved an estimated $175 million in costs and more than 1,500 lives, all because of that little checklist of those 5 things for the central line infection. And that was just central line infection. So that's quite an amazing feat. But the other element that I don't want to forget is that there was also the element of the team and the power structure of the team. You're going to be reading about that, but I have one more video to go over a couple more chapters.